A colleague wrote about the most consequential coordinator hires in college football, but he seems to have missed one big one in Ann Arbor. We're going to get into that right here on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. Thank you to all of our everydayers who watch or listen to the show every single day. Also, a big thank you for making us your first listen. First, Blake Topmeyer, my colleague over at USA Today Sports. No, I don't know him, but he's still my colleague. Wrote about the 8 coordinator hires in college football that he just cannot stop thinking about, but he seems more focused on the big names than he does a certain Mr. Jason Beck, who I think was certainly left out. We're going to get into that. And then we'll get into the Michigan loss at Duke and all that entails. And then finally, we're going to begin our position group outlook before spring ball, starting with the quarterbacks. Let's start it off. And let me pull this up because I didn't pull this up. I just want to see the names that he did include. And I have a good reason. This isn't just pure homerism. Because of right, like for all of the talk of me saying like, yeah, I really wish that Kyle Whittingham would go out and have gotten like the big name and all of that stuff. Like, I don't mean that at offensive coordinator. Okay. I really don't. So he included 8 names that he just can't stop thinking about, right? Like he goes to bed, he puts head to pillow. He's just like, oh man, these are really, really great. And I mean, I don't begrudge him these names, but they're Chip Kelly, Bobby Petrino, Charlie Weiss Jr., Will Muschamp, Gary Patterson, Buster Faulkner, Chad Morris, and Jim Knowles. What do almost all of those have in common? Name cachet, name recognition, right? And so I don't begrudge him, like Chip Kelly, former Oregon and UCLA head coach, who's been in the NFL for a couple stints, obviously was a head coach as well as a coordinator in the NFL, offensive coordinator for Ohio State the year they won the championship. Fine, goes to Northwestern. I mean, that's massive. I'm not gonna disagree with that. He deserves to be on that list. Bobby Petrino. You know, we know all about him and his prowess, good or bad, on and off the field. Will Muschamp at Texas has had his moments in the sun. He was supposed to be the heir apparent to Texas, the head coaching job after Mac Brown, but then he departed for Florida, I believe it was, and before he ended up at South Carolina. Gary Patterson, former head coach at TCU, right? Like these are all coordinators that mostly have been head coaches elsewhere, have had high-end coordinating jobs before. Jim Knowles is another one, right? Like they've all been considered to be kind of what I just said would be the kind of what I wanted Michigan to get. So why do I feel like he missed out on Jason Beck? Because here's the thing. Jason Beck has only been an offensive coordinator for 3 years. The first year at Syracuse, not great, nothing to write home about. But at New Mexico and at Utah, albeit with the same quarterback at both stops, he did the types of things that if he was at one of the schools that these other guys were, like if he was at a Texas, if he was at Texas and did that for 2 years, let's just say he was at Texas for 2 years and did what he was able to do with those other 2 stops, he probably would have gotten head coach interviews, right? Because what did he do? He took the number 105 offense in the country at Utah and turned them into the 4th ranked offense and 2nd ranked rushing attack. At New Mexico, he had the 65th ranked offense is what he inherited, and he turned it also to the 4th ranked offense and 2nd rushing attack. So he, even in 2 years, is incredibly consistent. Like if it was like, okay, with one, it was, kind of like middling, like 105 to 36 and 65 to 20 or something like that, then you'd look at it and you'd say, that's pretty nice. Like he seems like he's good. He's on an upward trajectory. But considering that he did got both teams to the exact same spot, Like, I'm not going to do the math. This would take way too long for me to go through every single school. I would have to venture to guess that the move from 105 to number 4 is probably the biggest move up offensively of any team in the country last year. And what he inherits in Ann Arbor is perfectly suited for what he wants to do, right? This isn't just a big name going somewhere, right? Because we see it all the time. You see big names go somewhere and it doesn't work out. Jim Knowles went from Ohio State to Penn State and it didn't work out. Now he's at Tennessee. We'll see what that looks like. It's not like he forgot how to coach. Usually he gets better in year 2 anyway, but he did turn Ohio State around in quite a hurry, to be honest. But he didn't do the same thing with Penn State. So, you know, like you see that. You've seen some of these guys do okay where they've been. Like a Bobby Petrino is not lighting the world on fire most places he goes. But if you really want to be smart about it and kind of dig deeper and just sit there and not just like kind of cater to the masses, then you're going to look at like, who are those up and comers? Who has done more with less? And I would venture to say that Jason Beck has done more than do more with less. He's turned less into elite. I know that no one's really sitting there thinking of Utah or New Mexico each of the last 2 years as being like, those were elite offenses, but they were. You can't argue with results. And for him to come in and take over Bryce Underwood, Jordan Marshall, Andrew Marsh, Jamie French, JJ Buchanan, the offensive line Michigan has, it's almost kind of unfair. It would really surprise me if he didn't have at least turn them from Michigan was 69th in the country last year offensively, which was a massive, massive improvement upon the year before, right? Remember, they were like 117th or something the year before. I would venture to guess having, you know, going from racing in, basically he went from taking go-karts and finishing well in NASCAR to suddenly like, okay, now you're in Formula One. That's for you, Josiah. You take that. Yeah, sometimes we just make the show for Josiah and I. That's what happens when you're talking to a camera by yourself like me. But, you know, like I think that's kind of the thing is now he's in Formula One and we'll see where that goes. Like Utah's no slouch. It was a Power 4 school. It was in the Big 12 and still had the number 4 offense in the country, 2nd ranked rushing attack. 4th ranked scoring offense. So you have to look at it and imagine if that guy could do that without having the tools he has now, what is he going to do when he has them? And so I just think it is a lack of seeing the overall picture because like you could have absolutely have looked at it and said like, well, what did Michigan bring in? Right? Because that is a big name school, but ultimately it's kind of like anyone that is like Joel Klatt and Josh Pate both put out their head coaching rankings within the last 24 hours. Josh more so just had all the big names. Joel went a little bit off by having Whittingham, not because he's at Michigan, but based off what he did at Utah, as well as Kalani Sitake on his top 10 list. And I tend to err more with Joel, not because Michigan's guy is on it, but because a guy's not at Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, you know, Texas, doesn't mean that they aren't like an incredible coach, right? Like if you did it that way all the time without Indiana having done what it did with Curt Cignetti, you would have looked at Curt Cignetti and said, yeah, he all right. You know, like you would be looking at it kind of like whatever. But you have to imagine that there are insanely good coaches that just aren't at the biggest schools in the country. Jason Beck happened to be one of them. And now he is. And now he's got more in his arsenal. He's got, you know, more weapons to work with than he's ever had. And that should pay dividends. It's hard for me to look at it in terms of, well, that, you know, that worked at Utah, but is it going to work at Michigan? I'd have to venture to say that I can't imagine it won't. Will it be number 4 in the country? I don't know, but it certainly could be. And I would venture to guess it will be closer to that than it will be 30th in the country. But the defenses are tougher in the Big Ten. It's a tough schedule. So maybe not. I don't know. All right, let's talk Michigan's game against Duke. Was a 68-63 loss. But if you're gonna say something was a good loss, this might be it. But we'll get to that here in just a moment. But before we do, workplace chaos, deadline stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open when the pressure's on and you need the right hire. This is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for. Skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute that I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Thank you for making Locked On Wolverines your first listen. I'm telling you, you gotta join the Everydayer Club if you're not. You gotta dig deeper. The way you do that is, number one, the ad free that comes with Everydayer Club. Number two, and I think the most important thing, is the Discord access. If you have a question that you feel is pressing and needs to be answered, you can wait for the mailbag. And if it's something that's like I was kind of sworn to secrecy about or something like that, on this show, you're going to get kind of a meh response, right? Because it's public. But on the Everydayer Club member only Discord, you don't have to worry about that. I'm going to give it to you as straight as I possibly can. Yeah, there might be a slight amount of hesitation. But if you wanted to know about the thoughts of what Dave Peliquin was going to bring to the GM position, first the negative and then the positive, you could have gotten it really actually pretty openly there on the Discord. If you wanted to know about Bryson Kuzdal coming back or Taylor Tatum moving to the defensive side of the ball, you would have heard first. When I say first, I mean first. There was no one outside the program that knew before the Everydayers Club. So let me tell you, $5 a month, $50 a year. So that's basically nothing. Think it's worth it. Go and check out Locked On Wolverines at supercast.com or the show notes to learn more. All right, let's talk Michigan Duke. The first thing that I put in my 5 takeaways was about the foul. Not discrepancy, because the discrepancy actually went the other way. And I've seen this argument made online. It's like, well, Duke had more fouls. Okay, so let's just break this down for a second, because I think this was a big part as to why Michigan lost the game. And I am trust me, the last thing I want to do is ever blame the refs for anything. Football, basketball, whatever. That's just not how my mentality works. You got to play above the refs as much as you can. I did not feel like what happened, particularly in the first half, was I felt like that changed the game, right? Like it hence at halftime I tweeted the Breaking Bad saying like the refs in this game, the Heisenberg, this, all of it, it's all about me. Because that's kind of what was happening in that. And it really was not completely one-sided, but close, right? Like Cameron Boozer had 4 fouls in the set, and by near the end of the game. So it's not like Duke got away scot-free, but it seemed like when Michigan was starting to make pushes and things of that nature, there were just some very consequential calls or no calls that happened in this. And I think Aday Mara being forced out relatively early, and he earned I think the third foul he got, I think he absolutely earned that one, right? Like that one, if I'm not mistaken, if that was the one I'm thinking of, it was either his third or his fourth foul. He definitely earned it. But like the other two felt like he shouldn't have been standing there. He was looking in the wrong direction. He was looking at one of the Duke players in the eyes. Right. You had the travel on Yaxel when he did not come anywhere close to having possession. And then on the other side of the court, Boozer has the same exact play and it goes uncalled. There were 2 out of bounds that Michigan didn't challenge that probably should have, that ended up being called Duke basketball that were clearly Michigan basketball. You had the Aday Mara near the end of the game, the goaltend that when Jay Billis is on the broadcast and he's a Duke guy and he's sitting there complaining about the calls that are going against Michigan here, including that one, that kind of tells you what you need to know. So first and foremost, I think that changed the game. I think the way that I look at it is like, yeah, Duke got called for far more fouls, but they could have been called for, they had what, like 10 in the second half? They could have been called for something like 20. Whereas Michigan had, I think, 6. They could have been called for like maybe 9. And I think maybe a couple of those, especially in the first half. I don't remember how many they had in the first half. I think you could take away about half of them because that's just kind of like, okay, that wasn't really a foul, but okay. Right. So that's a little bit different. Now, yeah, I did see some that Michigan got away with, but I think that those kind of end up balancing out, whereas Duke just got away with a heck of a lot more. So that's not just why Michigan lost. I thought shot selection, particularly in the second half, was terrible. They were settling too much for the outside. I think that though the foul trouble, especially with Mara and Morez Johnson, kind of took them out of their game, and that kind of, like you had to be physical with them and tussle down low, and they just kind of were incapable of doing that. Duke did an incredible job defensively of really getting to the lane and clogging things up and making it really difficult. There were some misses. L.A. Cadeau missed that one big layup that really was like late. That was like super consequential. There were some threes that went in and out. I do think that Yaxel Lendeborg looked like the best player on the court. And I know some will probably argue it was Cameron Boozer was. I thought Lendeborg was just a smidge better. I mean, not just because the score says so, but I just thought that he was a little bit more consequential. He started eventually getting a lot of attention. But the second half is kind of where things went awry, because in the first half, it looked like it was all Michigan, even though they took a 2-point deficit into the locker room. It felt to me like Michigan was the better team through the first 20 minutes. But in the second, Michigan went from scoring 51% to 29%. You're not going to be a lot of teams doing that. And so you have to credit Duke with that. But I also think that here's the thing is you live and you learn, right? Like you treated it like a tournament game for the most part. Not completely, but close. You came up 5 points short despite looking like the better team for half the game. And despite all of the things that kind of were working against you, whether it was self-inflicted, ref-inflicted, or Duke-inflicted. So I think that does a lot for you in being able to kind of say like, okay, now we know what's needed. Now we understand what we're working with. And as long as they get a fair whistle, if these two teams match up again, then I think that they'll be in a good spot. But disappointing that they didn't end up coming away with it. Kind of felt like they were going to. Obviously, they tend to struggle, as most teams do, against Duke. Regardless if it was the Coach K or now the John Shire era, like it's still just an elite team. But there's no shame in losing that game. I love hearing that Dusty May this morning was like, we would reschedule that game again next year, right? Like not talking about necessarily Duke, but just having the big non-con, because I love matchups, right? Like I don't want to see games for the sake of games. Yeah, Michigan football schedule this year, a little more daunting than I would like, but I will almost always take the big matchups over being like, yeah, most of these games are winnable. They've got 2 big games, right? Like, so to have a non-conference game of this caliber in February is awesome. I've not been like that amped up in a long time for a regular season basketball game outside of like Michigan State, right? Like the last time I can remember was maybe 2013 when Michigan went to Indiana. That's like maybe the last time that I can recall where I was just like, I was on pins and needles all day waiting for that game. So to have this is awesome. Disappointing that Michigan didn't pull out the win, but like, it's not depressing, if you know what I'm saying. All right, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about spring ball, which is coming up in 3 weeks from tomorrow. So I'm starting my position previews in writing. They'll probably all be done this week. Over the course of the podcast, we're probably going to do maybe 2 or 3 a week until we get them all done. Probably, not 2, but like 3 or 4 a week, I think is the better way to say it. So that's the goal. All right, we're going to get to the quarterbacks, and we'll do that here in just a moment. But before we do, this is Mazda's moving the game forward for those who show there's more to the score than what's on screen. Though Michigan lost to Duke on Saturday, there were some solid performances that kept the Wolverines in the game. Yaxel Lendeborg led all scorers with 21 points, while Morris Johnson Jr. and Aday put up 13 and 10 respectively. LJ Kaysen was a huge spark off the bench, even with only 7 points. And had Michigan not gotten into foul trouble in the first half, who knows what could have been. But even so, they never gave up and were still in the game until the end. These remind us of what it really takes to raise the bar. It's that extra work off the court, dialing in every detail, giving it that extra fire, that grit, and I never quit. We put the same passion into every model. Highlights make the reel, but what it took to get there makes it count. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you. All right, we're going to move on here momentarily, but before we do, ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? Well, FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for 2. That's right, flights, tickets, the whole experience. If you've already been looking at the board and are thinking about which team can make a deep run, well, this is the perfect time to lock it in. I love futures this time of year, whether it's picking a team to win the championship or grab a conference title. It adds that extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch, and now you can not only can your pick cash, but it can also send you to the finals. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, I think starting with the quarterbacks is always the most obvious, especially right now, not only because it's the most consequential position group on any entire football team, but also because there's a little bit of a foregone conclusion. And I understand I got lots of questions from people after the Whittingham hire, especially after they brought in some transfers saying, is Bryce 100% going to start? I'm going to go ahead and say yes. Like, the chances of Bryce Underwood not starting in game 1 against Western Michigan are infinitesimally low. And the only reason they even have a shot is more injury based than it is skill or coach's decision based, right? Like it's not a mistake that Kyle Whittingham, the only name he mentioned of a current player in his introductory press conference was Bryce Underwood, right? Like it's the only one he mentioned by name. The former number 1 overall recruit's got talent through the roof. Yes, there were some struggles last year, but even though we didn't foresee it being as much of an issue on this show, others certainly looked at it and said he's going to have freshman issues. He did. I just thought that maybe some coaching was going to happen, right? I thought that maybe he's making some mistakes in the game, and then they're like, I'm being hyperbolic to say that they didn't like take him aside and say like, hey, we got to fix this. But like ultimately, did they fix a lot of the mistakes? Did they actually do it? No, they didn't. The same mistakes that were happening early in the season were happening late in the season, and they were bigger. So that kind of tells you what you need to know. But Bryce Underwood is as entrenched a starter as you're going to find on this team. Number 1. So second-year player, but, there's 4 departures from the team. You got Davis Warren going to Stanford. You've got Jaden Davis going to East Tennessee State. Mikey Keene going to Arizona State. And Jake Garcia is going nowhere. He's going into the job market, maybe? I don't know. Yeah, it hasn't been picked up by anybody. So, but they supplemented that with 4 new additions. 2 were true freshmen, Tommy Carr, Brady Smigel. But also brought in Braden Fowler-Nicolosi, a former starter from Colorado State, who did kind of opt out last year, but certainly showed a prowess of dual threat and all of that kind of stuff, and being able to throw and run and all of the kind of stuff that you've seen Jason Beck want to deploy. And then Colin Hurley, who's kind of a perfect stopgap, was the 2024 class, right? They don't have that guy on the roster anymore, so to be able to have a junior level player in the room who was at LSU, who was a 4-star and all of that just elevates the room. Ultimately, the way I look at it is, yes, they will provide competition and more competition for Bryce than what he got last year. Had Mikey Keene been healthy, maybe it would have been a different story. If Davis Warren had been healthy, maybe it would have been a different story. But ultimately, Bryce was fighting against Jake Garcia and Jaden Davis last year. Not ideal. Not ideal. So I think that can help raise the floor, essentially. He's already got an amazingly high floor. That helps raise the floor just that much. And it can help raise the ceiling as well. You add in his quarterback's coach that he brought in for himself, or he's going to see in the Palmer guy who's coached guys like Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and Trevor Lawrence and all of these guys. But you also have Jason Beck, who's shown what he can do with Devin Dampier at both New Mexico and Utah. Coy Detmer Jr., who's been excellent at what he's done. I mean, the outlook for the room is just so much higher than it was before, which I think is really exciting. I just think that there's a lot that there is to work with there. Now, I think the other good thing is if Bryce gets injured, something happens, right? Because it is the game of football. You just kind of never know. Braden Fowler-Nicolosi is absolutely the type of player who can come in and still win you games. Well, I will caveat, though. If it's the Michigan defense that we are accustomed to seeing, then yeah, he can do that. You can still not have much of a drop off. But if it's kind of a little bit more of the worst impulses of the last 2 years, which again, it's different with Jay Hill, right? Like, but his defenses at BYU were very, very, very good. Were they elite? No, they were not. Now, it should be different because him taking over and getting players like he's going to be working with, like he's had some really good ones. But like, this is a different, like, it's the same thing we talked about with Jason Beck. It's a different deal. Like inheriting a Jair Hill, even bringing over guys from Utah who he didn't coach, like Smith Snowden, John Henry Daly, like those are elite players that weren't elite coming out of the recruiting classes, right? But now you've got a Trey Pierce, who was a high-end 4-star. You've got a Nathaniel Osu-Boateng, who was one of the most sought-after linebackers in his class, right? Like there's just a lot more that he has to work with. Zeke Berry, who was a high-end 4-star. Rod Moore, who's one of the best safeties in the country if he's healthy. You know, there's just a lot more to work with. So I think that you need that counterbalance of the defense also doing its job in the case that you're going to guys behind Bryce. Could Michigan find itself in some shootout type of situations? Yes. And I know that I think it was in this last mailbag that there was some concern of like, is that what it's going to be? It might be, but here's the good news. Michigan should be more equipped to do that. We've seen Utah have the shootouts and win and lose, but still they were closer, right? It wasn't like a situation like even last year against USC where it just was like, once they went down, it kind of felt like, well, that's it. That's the game. Like you weren't going to go toe to toe with them. Now you probably have an offense that can, and now you're certainly more equipped because if the quarterback is being coached, has more competition, and all of that, I just think you're just in a much better place. All right, that's going to do it for us today. We'll be back on Tuesday. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. Peace.